Hello, and welcome back to Shade Tree Philosophy. I'm your host, Dave, and we're going to continue today in our study of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, King James Version. And the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Mark is a very interesting chapter, and it has a lot of information and a lot of people that view it in many different ways. So it could take many weeks to get through the book of Mark and all the different views and attitudes towards this chapter, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to stick with a line study and work through this chapter and not get too bogged up in it. I will give some of my views, of course, but know that there is more than just the predominant view of, say, the Left Behind series. Many people know that the rapture idea, the trib. We can all agree that there is going to be a judgment. I can agree with that certainly, but there's many things about this chapter that make you think, well, he is talking about this generation here, and there's many times you think, well, he's talking about far in the future. But just know that Jesus is talking to his audience who are just first century Jews, and he is talking about the destruction of the temple. And so he continues here in verse 14. And by the way, I said last week what the abomination of desolation was something that happened in the time of Daniel. I was wrong. Daniel was writing about a future thing that hadn't happened yet. Now, I confused it with the Ark of the Covenant being taken by the Philistines and placed in front of the idol of Dagon. And that idol was knocked down and then broken. And then the Philistines, went through plagues and all that. And so anyway, I got that confused. And that is not it. So it's important that even I, check myself and know my life and doctrine carefully. Watch it. Just know I was wrong. So he was talking about a future event. Now, some people believe that this abomination of desolation, I'm going to read verse 14 here. But when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let he that readeth understand. Let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, that's pretty straightforward, but an abomination of desolation basically means something abominable is happening, and it brings desolation. Now, he's talking about the book of Daniel. Now, if you go back to the book of Daniel in chapters 11 and 12, it talks about the abomination of desolation. And in both instances, it also talks about the daily sacrifice ending. Now, the daily sacrifice in Daniel's time, the temple had already been destroyed because the Babylonians did that. And so he's talking about a future event where the temple, of course, would be restored and the daily sacrifice would continue. And here we are in Jesus' time. And so when Jesus says, this abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, you go back and look, and that's what you see. It says a lot more there, but just know that that's when the verses that talk about the abomination of desolation, they're also talking about the daily sacrifices ending in something, bringing a desolation of something. And so Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. So he says, flee to the mountains. Now, interestingly enough, is that the Christians that listened to Jesus' words when they saw the temple, or they saw the Romans coming in, and they took this prophecy to heart, they fled to the mountains and were not wiped out. The church in Jerusalem was not. I can't remember the name of the town, but I think it's Pella is the name of the town. I think that's what I read, where they fled to. And so, interestingly enough, the church was not killed here, along with the Jewish inhabitants. Now, there was 1.3 million, is what the belief is, of how many Jews that were killed here. So it was truly a Holocaust that they had never seen before. So he says, flee to the mountains. He says, let him that's in the house not go back down in to get anything. And that's verse 15. I'll just read it. And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of the house. And let him that is in the field not turn back again to take up his garments. They're saying just get away. Run for your lives. Run as if your life depended on it, or you wouldn't care. Like a tsunami's rolling in. And in a sense, that's what was going on with the Roman army. You know, this abomination of desolation is thought to have occurred a general, actually before Jesus' time, some people think that it was a general of Alexander the Great who built a temple to, or brought in an image of Zeus into the temple and sacrificed a pig. That would be abominable, but it didn't make the daily sacrifices in. And but it was certainly an abominable thing that happened in the temple. But Jesus is talking about something that's future of him. So if he's saying it's the same as the one that Daniel talked about, it hadn't happened yet. But if you look at the idea of a pagan image being brought in, something that's abominable and placed in the temple, well, the Romans ran around with their emperor, an idol built to the emperor, because they worshiped their emperor, and they also always carried their standards that had their pagan gods with them. So there was that going on too. And many believe that at the sacking of Jerusalem and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, that the soldiers sacrificed, to their emperor and defiled the temple by entering into the Holy of Holies. And that was, and truly after the destruction of the temple, there was no more daily sacrifices. And there would not be, and still has not been since that time, because that was the end of Jerusalem, the center of the Jewish people, and that was the end of the temple. That was in AD 70. So he says, these get out of town. And what are them that are with child and give suck in those days, and pray that your flight might not be in winter? Well, you're not taking food, you're not taking extras. You may not have a meal, but you're getting out of town. If it's cold, you're not taking extra clothing. You're carrying what's on your back. And of course, the weakest among us suffer the most, so the children. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of creation, which God created until this time, neither shall be. Now that's saying a lot. Is he talking about the Jews? Is he talking about all of us? Is he talking about present to those that are in front of him and their friends and family? Or is he talking about something 2,000 years in the future? Is he talking about something in 30, 40 years in the future? He says in Jewish thought, a generation was 40 years. Harkening back to, the wandering in the desert for 40 years. And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened the days. And then if any man shall say to you, lo, here is Christ, or lo, there he is, believe him not. Now, those things were going on. People who are anointed was going on. It's certainly going on in our day. And there were people who believed that they taught the truth. Think about the Gnostics. That was going on even in the time of Paul, because he was combating it all the time. He's saying, don't listen to these guys that say they have secret knowledge. Listen to us. They were saying that they were anointed. They had greater knowledge than the apostles. For false Christs and false prophets shall rise up and shall show signs under wonders to seduce, and if it were possible, even the elect. Now, the elect here can mean Jewish people. They were considered the elect, the chosen. It could be those who were washed in the Lamb's blood. as many people believe. But at this time, Jesus hadn't died yet. So if he's giving hints about the elect or those who are already baptized, because there was the baptism, and he says, the kingdom of God had been advancing since the time of John the Baptist. So, this new kingdom and this new way had already begun, this new way of living. But here he's saying, there'll be false prophets. In the book of Acts, in chapter 8, you see an example of a guy named Cyrus of Cyrene, I think it was. Anyway, Simon of Cyrene, that's what it is. And Simon was a sorcerer who lived in this town, and he was also baptized with other believers who saw the great works. I think it was Paul, or anyway, it was one of the apostles. Maybe it's Peter. I think it was Peter. Performing miracles and giving the gift of the Holy Spirit. And so this guy wanted to be able to have the Holy Spirit given to him so that he could go and continue doing his sorcery and being known as someone who was great. It's interesting reading in that chapter, Acts chapter 8. So those things were going on, and even the possible that, people, it says, deceive even the elect. Well, just because you're elect doesn't mean you can't be deceived, or if your faith is not developed, you might be more prone to listen to deception. Who knows? But take ye heed, behold, I have foretold you all these things. So take heed what he's told you. Take it to heart. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun, now this is where it gets into more of an apocryphal vein. Talking about judgment, actually, when you hear this kind of language, if you go back to the book of Ezekiel, it has this kind of language, I think. I know Isaiah has some of this. There's, who are the other books? Of course, Daniel. And I can't remember. There's another book that has some, there's probably more apocryphal writings. And of course, but I'm talking about ones that Jesus would know at the time. And so you will see this language used where the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give its light, verse 24. Verse 25, and the stars in heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. Again, some of this is recorded, I think, in history. Some people did record celestial events that happened just in the few weeks and, years after Jesus had died and resurrected. And the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Now, this, many people believe, is talking about Judgment Day. If you were to talk to some of the people that, there were some historians that recorded about the year 65, that there was an event that happened at Pentecost where there was a shaking of the heavens and a voice saying, remove henceforth, or let us remove henceforth, or let us leave, basically. And then there was a report of chariots in the clouds and soldiers and chariots in the clouds. And that was before the destruction of the temple. That was just when the Roman army began to invade Jerusalem after the revolt. And so some people do believe that, even at this point where Jesus says, when you see him coming in the clouds, was witnessed by this first century. Now, many people believe that this is talking about the end times, when Jesus will come back. Some people believe in a rapture scenario where some are left and some taken. And there's a tribulation that follows that. Some people believe there's a tribulation and that all people suffer and then some are taken and left. which doesn't make any sense. And then to me, and then there's people that believe that their tribulations happen all the time, and that this is talking about Judgment Day. And that makes sense about judgment because this language, this apocryphal language about the sun shall not give its light and the moon, let's see, what does it say? And in those days, let's see, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give its light and the stars in heaven shall fall and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then verse 27 goes on and it says, and there shall be, then he shall send his angels and shall gather together his elect from the four winds. Now that has to be about the future. I don't know how that could be tied into the first century. But he says he will gather them from the four winds, from the other parts of the earth to the utmost part of the heaven. Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When your branches are tender, this is verse 26. No, 28, sorry. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When the leaves are yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is near. So ye like, in like manner, when ye see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the door. Now, some people believe the parable of the fig tree is about Israel. That is talking about the nation of Israel. And so some people believe it was the gathering of all the people from scattered all over the world, and that is the sign that this is verse 28 is referring to. And in some ways that is possible. Makes sense. But he is a parable, and there is something here that is deeper to be understood than just the words. But he says when you see, his angels going out and gathering together the elect from all the four winds, well, I guess it's talking about judgment of us all. Verily I say unto you, he says in verse 3, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. That is a controversial statement. That's why the atheists in the world say, well, see, Jesus wasn't right. All these things didn't come to pass. And then people who believe that all these things already came to pass say, well, these things already happened. So, if a prophet is not, if what he says is going to come to pass and does not come to pass, well, that prophet is considered not to be a prophet. And he should be ignored. So Jesus is saying that all these things are supposed to pass. Well, if they didn't come to pass, then is he a prophet that was false? It's a tough one. That's why I say this chapter is a tough chapter. I will say this: the historians of its day, and many people believe that the destruction of the temple and the ending of the sacrifices, like was talked about by Daniel the prophet, meant the end of the Jewish daily sacrifices, which means the temple, the destruction of the temple, and the Jewish way of life. So, when the temple ended, Christianity was no longer thought to be a sect of Judaism anymore, because Judaism was gone. And so many of these things might be prophesying too about the end of the Jewish age and the beginning of the Gentile age, which is another belief, another thought on this chapter. And so were all these things supposed to pass to make that possible, where the age of the church and the age of the Gentile in the age of Jesus' teachings take predominance. Not a kind of a second. It's no longer just the second-hand religion from the Jewish faith. All right, so I'm going to continue on here. Verse 31, heaven and earth shall pass away, but these words of mine shall not pass away. But of that day and of the hour no man knows, not even the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. Now that could be talking about the end of days. It could have been talking about when the temple will be destroyed. It could fit both. Some people believe also that these things that are talked about have to do with what happened in the first century, and it was a reflection of what was going to happen at the end of the age. But in verse 33, take ye heed, watch and pray, for ye know not when the time is. For the Son of Man is a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and every man his work, and commanded the porter to watch. Now that sounds like the parable of the vineyard, right? Remember, it's kind of booking and ending this whole thing, because Jesus talked about, I think it was chapter 11 where he first talks about the vineyard. Well, here we are in chapter 13, the end of it. And he's talking about, a very similar situation here as the vineyard. But he's talking about posting to watch and to be watching for the master. Don't be the one who is cast out. As you will see, as will happen to, actually, the Jewish leadership and the temple leadership and the Sanhedrin and all things that hold the Jewish faith together centrally. At this point in time, the Jewish faith goes on, but it's beginning of the Talmud, and I believe. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning. Verse 36, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. So, guys, Jesus is saying, keep yourself sharp and stay alert. Not hard. And he's saying, stay alert for that you not be caught, doing what you ought not be. Jesus was a fire and brimstone kind of guy, too. He had convictions, and he had love, but he had convictions. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. So as Jesus commanded us, watch. And I commend you by, first of all, watching this video, but I call you with the same words of Jesus to watch and to pursue your knowledge of what he's asking us to be aware of. And so, seek out the truth on this chapter. There's lots and lots out there. There's lots of views, and there's lots of ways to look at it. And so it does take more than just a 20-minute go over a couple of videos. So I encourage you to do so. And I look forward to seeing you next video then. And so in the meantime, know that this is treasure. All these things are worth seeking. So continue to do so, and we'll see you next video. Bye-bye.